You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Beit Israel, 5776, 2015. This week's Parsha is Parshas Noach, and I'm actually going to skip the story of Noach, and I'm going to go straight to the end of the Parsha, because I'd like to discuss the idea of the Dor HaFlaga, the generation of the Dispersion, and the introduction that the Torah gives us to Avram Avinu, to Abraham, who would be the progenitor of the Jewish people. And in looking at the description of our Chazal, how our sages explain the Dor HaFlaga and the interaction of Avram Avinu, of Abraham, with this generation of dispersion, so the Chazal, our sages, fill in a lot of blanks. The Torah is very unclear as to who exactly was. Who were they? What was the problem? What did they do wrong? Why was there a dispersion? Why did God himself, as it were, come down and say, I don't like what's going on here, I'm going to disperse them throughout the land? The Torah is almost silent on the story. The Torah is almost silent on the chet, the sin of the generation of the dispersion. And the Midrashim have to fill in the holes, fill in the gaps. So the first question I'd like us to think about as we start discussing who was or who were these people, the first question I'd like to think about and plant the seed inside of your mind is, why indeed is it? Why is it that the Torah is quiet when it comes to the dispersion in explaining their sin? It doesn't speak about it, and our Chazal need to fill in the blanks. So, but why? Why is it indeed that way? That's the first question. The second question is, so the Midrashim also talk about Avram Avinu, Abraham, as we said, and his interaction with the generation of the dispersion. It talks about him as Avram HaIvri, Abraham the Ivri, the Hebrew, as we refer to it. So the word Ivri in Hebrew actually means the one who's on the other side. And our Chazal tell us that the entire generation, the entire time, all of the people who lived in the time of Abraham, they were all on one side. And Abraham alone stood on the other side, because they were all preaching the concept of idolatry, that there are many gods, one should bow down, heaven forbid, to the sun, the moon, and the stars. That was the idea that they were proliferating. Avram Avinu, Abraham, came along and said, this is not true. There's one God who is above all of these powers. Maybe that they do have some powers, but it's not powers that they have on their own. The stars don't control reality, but rather they are the vehicle through which God controls reality. Now as his chiddush, that was the novelty of Abraham. The people fought against him. Nimrod was the leader of these people, of the generation of the dispersion, and hopefully we'll soon see exactly what was their sin, what was the thing that they had done wrong. But what's interesting here, and the point that I'd like to make, is that Avram Avinu, this whole interaction that he has with these people, him being on one side, everyone else being on the other side, and the story that comes out of it, which I would like to also share with you, which has to do with him breaking the idols and being brought in front of Nimrod, thrown inside of the Kivshon Ha'esh, inside of the fire, and surviving that, which is also only barely hinted to in the Torah. That whole story is something which we don't hear about. We don't hear about it. The first thing that we really hear about Avram Avinu is in next week's Parsha. It's in Parshas Lech Lecha, when God says to him, go, leave where you are, leave your father's house, leave everything behind, and go to Israel. And that's something that happens much later in his life. We don't really hear, the Torah is not explicit. It doesn't really tell us about the beginnings of Avram Avinu, even about what he teaches about the one God. I mean, we look at the stories as they continue. You look in Lech Lecha, you look at this, at what happens to him as he gets to Israel. It speaks about his chesed, his kindness, his interactions with Avimelech and the Paro, and they're trying to steal his wife, etc., etc., etc. Everybody knows he's a man of God, but the Torah never really talks about what he's preaching. The Torah never tells us the shita, the opinion of Avram Avinu, of Abraham, and what he stands for. It's almost never mentioned. It mentions perhaps that he called out there in the name of God, but it doesn't actually say what he was saying. It doesn't tell us that he was he was the man of God. He was the one who believed in the one God, and we know that. But it doesn't speak about that at length, and it's very interesting. It needs explanation. Why indeed is it that the beginning of Avram Avinu's life, the shita, how he became molded as a human being in his philosophy and his belief in one God, That's something that's left out. It's just left for our Chazal, our sages, to fill in the gaps on. Why indeed is it left out? And why, as the story continues, do we only hear about his actions, his goings, his doings, his back and forth? Even the Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, is something that there's movement there. But we don't hear anything about his philosophy, his teachings, that which, as we understand Avraham and we understand his place in history, was the center of who he was and what he was teaching. How come the Torah is almost silent on Avraham Avinu and his teachings of the one God of the people of Israel? Now, before we move into trying to understand this, there's one more question, one more point I'd like to raise, and that is that in the description, the way that the Medrash speaks about the Dor HaFlaga, the generation of the dispersion, it says that what they wished to do, what was their point, what was their goal with this tower that they built? Part of the goal with the tower was that they wanted to be able to climb up to heaven. Classically, this is how we hear it described. They wanted to climb up to heaven and fight against God, which, of course, if we think about it, doesn't really make that much sense, because if we're talking about a God who's spiritual, so you don't really need to go anywhere. If you actually want to fight against God, all you need to do is defy his will, right? But somehow, by building this tower, there was going to be a great defiance of God. Interestingly and beautifully, the Medrash speaks about the fact that they wanted to place an idolatry, an idol, at the top of this migdal, at the top of this tower. And not only was there to be one tower, there was supposed to be multiple towers which would be built, and indeed, they would place this idol at the top of the tower. And the Medrash says something amazing. They were going to use these towers to prevent a further mabul, to prevent another flood from occurring. They were trying to be able to protect themselves against the wrath of God. If God would want to destroy them or punish them, that they would be protected somehow through this idolatry. Now, there's a few things that are really difficult to understand when we read this and we think about this. First of all, I mean, do they believe in God or not? Like, they're fighting against God. If you're fighting against God, that means that you believe in God, but you're just not interested in what God has to say. You're not interested in being subservient or to submit oneself to God. So here on one hand, they believe in God, and on the other hand, they don't believe in God. They want to fight against God. They don't believe in what God actually represents. It's very interesting just to notice that they believe in God and they don't believe in God. I mean, that's classic. You know, think about people who say that they're atheists. Very often it's because God did something wrong or something was so bad that it can't be that there's a God, so they're fighting against, there's like a rebellion against God. It seems that intrinsic, innate in the human experience is the belief of God. Okay, that's just an important point to notice. But another point here that's interesting is that what was the result of this tower? The result of this tower was that God dispersed them. At the beginning, as the Torah describes, there was one language. Everyone spoke Lashon HaKodesh, they spoke Hebrew. That was the language everyone spoke, and they used that language, that holy language, against God, who used the holy language to create the world. So because they had achdus, because they had unity, they were united in purpose, they were united in language, so that unity they used in order to somehow fight against God, to defy God, to try to prevent God from bringing any kind of punishment on them if they would do something wrong. What is the result? The result is Hashem takes all of these people, disperses them, creates 70 different languages for 70 different nations. No longer would they have that unity, not when it came to their language and not when it came to their location. No longer would they be in one place, but rather they were dispersed throughout the land. That was the tikkun. Now it's very interesting. Why specifically was it this, the dispersion? Why were they separated? The languages had to be split up into 70 languages. What is the significance of that being the punishment? How are we to understand this on a deeper level? Also, I'd like to share with you one more medrash. The medrash says, in speaking about Avraham Avinu, Abraham, and the way that he started to preach about the concept of one God and the falsehood of the idolatry that people were following. So the medrash says like this. I'm going to read it inside. Terach ovid slamim hoya. Avram's father Terach, so he served idolatry, and not only did he serve idolatry, he made the idols. Chatzman nafik la'atar. One time he left, he had to go out of the country. Hoishiv l'Avram moicher tachtos. He asked Abraham to sell in his place, to be the salesman of these idols, of the idolatry. Have a osi bar inish. So a person would come, by the yizvan. They wanted to buy an idol. Have a omer loy bar kamashnin. So Abraham would say to the person who is coming to purchase, he would say, how old are you? Have a omer loy bar chamshin oishit. And he would say, I'm 50 years old, I'm 60 years old. Have a omer loy. So Abraham would respond and say, vayle lahu gavra. To have a bar shitin uboy le misgad le bar yoima. He would say to them, woe unto the person who is 60 years old and he wants to serve an idol which was just created a day ago, which is 1 day old. And the person would become embarrassed and they would leave. Because that's the first story that we find about Abraham and the way that he started to preach. Second story, these are classic stories, but it's important to notice the details of these stories. Chad zman asas chad isa. A woman came one time to ina bida chada pinach de silas. She had in her hands a basket full of flour. Amarle helach karev kadmehen. She said to him, take this, and I want you to bring this basket full of flour as an offering in front of all of the idols. Come. So Abraham got up. Nesiv buk l'sabidei v'sabaron l'kulim p'silaya. He took an axe and he destroyed all of the idols. He left one idol standing, which was the biggest of them all. He placed the axe in the hand of the biggest one. Once his father came back, he said, who did this? Who destroyed all these idols? He said, what can I do? I can't tell a lie. This woman came in and she had a basket full of flour. And she said to me, bring this as an offering in front of them. And I brought it in front of them. Each of the idols, they started arguing, and they said, I want to be the one who eats this offering. No, I'm the one who wants to. Come, Adin Rabbah. So Abraham told his father that this very large idol got up, which was in the middle amongst them. You see, as the axe in his hand, he used that axe and destroyed all the other idols. Amar le mata maflabi. He said to him, his father said, what, are you making a joke out of me? Yadaninun, what do they know? They know anything? They know what's happening? You're giving them offerings? Abraham says to his father, listen, did you hear what you just said? Do you understand what you just said? And the story continues. His father brings him to Nimrod. Nimrod was the leader, the head idolater, and there's a whole conversation there. I don't want to get into that conversation. But I do want to focus in on the two different things that Abraham did here. One was that he showed this woman, or the person who would enter into his store, that you're old, you've been here for a long time, this is a brand new thing. Why are you 60-year-old bowing down to something which is 1 day old? That was the first thing, and they were embarrassed. Very interesting to point this out. They were embarrassed. It means that they knew the truth. That's what embarrassment is. A person who's humiliated means he's caught by the truth. That's the first point. The second point is that how did he show up? How did he show up his father that these are fake, that the idols are false? The way he did it was by destroying them, smashing them to bits. Why did he choose to do it that way? Why didn't he just, throw it in the river and say that the main honcho threw all the ones in the river? There's lots of different ways that he could have dealt with the same exact issue. Why did he specifically break them all? What's the significance of them being broken into pieces? So now, to start to understand this, I want to share with you one more medrash. And the medrash is very powerful, and it explains something deep about what's going on here. The medrash says like this: Oisin shel dora mabel, when it came to the generation of the flood, no one was left. There was only Noach. Vilu shel dora flaga, when it came to the generation of the dispersion, they all survived. What's the difference? Since the generation of the flood, they were busy stealing from each other. They were separate from each other. The verse in reference to the generation of the flood talks about the fact that they were constantly moving around their borders. They were stealing from each other. That's why nothing was left of them. There was no remnant. Aval Elu, but the generation of the dispersion, they had something. Even though they were rebelling against God, even though they were coming to fight with God, as it were, they loved each other. They were united. Shneimar vayihi kol artsafa echos. It says that the entire nation, the entire world at that time, they were all of one language. They spoke the same language, meaning they all saw eye to eye. That's why they survived. Furthermore, says the Medrash, Rabbi Omer, Godel HaShalom, Rabbi says, the concept of peace is incredible. Peace between men, between people, is so powerful. Even if the Jewish people serve idolatry, but if there's peace amongst them, God says, as it were, I can't do anything to you. I can't conquer you. I can't do anything to you negative. Because of the fact there's peace amongst them. Shenemar, we find this a verse in Hosea, chapter 4, verse 17. Because the people of Ephraim, who were the classic, the representation of the 10 tribes who ended up serving idolatry, since they're connected to each other, since they have that love for each other, leave them. There's nothing I can do. But when they start to fight with each other, when they start to become splintered, Mahu Omer, what does the verse say? Cholak libam atal yashamu. Now that their heart has been splintered, has broken apart, they don't agree with each other anymore, they don't have that love for each other, now they will be found guilty. Halamarata, this teaches you Godel HaShalom usnu HaMachlokes, how great is the concept of peace amongst the Jewish people, and how hated is the concept of arguments. Udvorim Achadim, the Medrash says one more thing, and this is the key, this is the bottom line of it. Dvorim Achadim, it refers to the fact that they were all one. Maisedor Mavel Nisparish, of a Maisedor Aflogan Nisparish. The Medrash addresses the point which we raised earlier, which is why is it that the Dor Mabel, the description in the Torah of the entire generation of the flood and what occurred and what was happening before, what was happening afterwards, that story the Torah describes in full. But when it comes to the Maaseh Dor Haflaga, when it came to the generation of dispersion, the Torah does not explain it. It's something that our Chazal need to fill in. It says the Medrash an amazing thing. The reason that the Torah didn't speak negatively about this generation was because of their achdus. This is how the Eitz Yosef explains what the Medrash is saying. Because they were united, even though they were united for evil, even though they were united to fight against God, to build a tower which would protect them from the wrath of God if they were doing evil, nevertheless, because they were united, they wouldn't do anything to take someone else's things, to try to get something that belonged to someone else. They saw themselves as part of a greater whole. Because of that, the Torah didn't want to say anything negative about them, didn't want to even talk about it beferish, talk about it explicitly, what the story was and what they had done wrong. It's an amazing thing, an amazing idea. And I think that what we see from this is extremely powerful, and it starts to explain why the beginnings of the story of Avram Avinu are also not nisparish, why it's also not explicit what happened at the beginning of Avram's life, why his general shita, his approach, his what he preached in life, the Torah doesn't explicitly say. And I think it's a very deep idea that when it comes to achdus, when it comes to unity, whether it's unity amongst people or whether it's seeing the broader picture of how everything comes together, all the pieces of reality, all the pieces fit together and form a greater whole. When it comes to that concept, when it comes to the transcendent idea of seeing things from that broader perspective, because we live in a two-dimensional reality, so to speak, we can't see it from the three-dimensional vantage point. The Torah is speaking to us where we are. It's speaking to us in our realm. And in our realm, the concept of achdus, of unity, of transcendent unity, of being able to see that bigger picture is something that we can't see from this vantage point. It's something that requires more of a pirush. It's deeper. It's sight. It's hidden. Yes, our Chazal can talk about it. Our sages can talk about it. But it's something that's hidden. And that's true when it comes to the achdus, comes to the generation of the flood, and it's true when it comes to Avram Avinu as well. Abraham, the beginning of his career, the beginning of the whole story of Avram is not nisparish, it's not explained. And I think that the pshat, the reason is because it's about achdus. It's about Abraham has the ability to see that all the pieces, everybody looks at the pieces, the idols, the koichavim, the stars, the sun, these are all the pieces that Hashem used, but Hashem is the broader unity that encompasses all of these pieces. Hashem works through all of these pieces. To us, it seems like many different koiches, many different powers, which is why we refer to God as Elokim, which is plural, because He's the Bala Koiches Kulam. God is behind all of those powers. But when it comes to that idea, which is the foundation of who Abraham is, it's the foundation of Judaism, that idea almost can't be explicitly stated. We can't talk about the beginning of Avram's life. We can't even talk about what he preaches. It's something that requires time. It's not until we get into the guts of the story of the Jewish people that we start to hear about the unity of God. It's really what happens in Mitzrayim, in the depth of the darkness, after all of the difficulties the Jews have gone through, after they've been broken as a people, after they've been enslaved for 210 years. Only then do we start to get this picture of God, the oneness of God, the unity of God, God being above nature, being beyond everything, and also being inside of reality. But the idea here is that the unity, that transcendent aspect, the bigger picture, is something that it's much harder to touch and to talk about. And we see that from the fact that we can't talk about the Dor HaFlaga, the generation of the dispersion themselves. And now the depth that comes out of here also is that the punishment of the Dor HaFlaga, the punishment always, whenever we have a punishment, it's always a tikkun, it's always a rectification. Somehow it serves to bring the people who have done something wrong back towards God, back to seeing the true reality. When the Dor HaFlaga, these people were united. So when they're united to do something wrong, so that unity is really false. That unity is really, they're united against God. The concept of unity is really belongs to God. So they're fighting against God with their unity. So they're really in a state of destruction, of separation. It's not real unity. So what Hashem does is, and it's an amazing thing, that when there's a state of unity which is negative, Hashem creates a state of disunity which is positive. He takes them out of their state of, quote, unity and puts them into a deeper state of, quote, disunity. But by doing that, by breaking it down more, what happens is now it becomes more possible to see the truth. The truth is revealed as you see the pieces for what they are, which is false. So the greatest example of that is what Avram Avinu does. Abraham takes the psalim, he takes these idols, and he smashes them to pieces. It's not a coincidence. He's smashing them to pieces, and by doing that, that's how he shows the truth of what they really are, which is that they are pieces. They are not the greater whole. God is the greater whole. And he's doing that by showing the truth. He speaks to these people. He says, you are 60 years old. You've been through time. You've touched all of the pieces of time. Because just like in reality, when you have a distance from one place to another, and that creates pieces, so to speak, as what happened with the dispersion, so too in time there are pieces of time. When I get from here now to there later, that in itself is a dispersion, so to speak. So he was saying to them, you have been living for so long, and you're talking to something which hasn't gone through that process, and therefore hasn't experienced the unity through separation that we're speaking about. So Avram, and what happened as a result of that? They were humiliated. They were embarrassed by his words. They realized the truth, the depth of what he was saying. And the depth was that here, when you go through the reality, you see the pieces for what they are, which is pieces. All of a sudden, what's revealed is that there's a deeper unity which binds all of the pieces. And that is something which you have to see for yourself. It's not explicit. It's not something that anybody can really tell you about. It's something that you have to realize on your own and face off with experientially. I want to bless you, and please bless me back. Hashem should help us to be able to recognize the unity which He is, and realize that so many times the experiences that we have, the destructions that we experience in our own lives, whether it's personally on a national level, these experiences also serve to break down the false reality that we see, so that we can experience the deeper reality, which is the reality of unity. Hashem should help us to be able to see that day, where we see the broader view, that transcendent view of the achdus, the unity of all of reality, and that day when all of us join together as one, to serve Hashem, all of us as one in that place, that unified place, Yerushalayim, the place which is whole, where there is true seeing of the unity of God. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.